Bonjour, my name is David Devere. I'm a wine and spirits educator and world traveler. You're watching Savvy Nomad TV. This is episode 10 of Tasting Tiny Little Bottles of Whiskey. Today we're tasting Green River Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey and Cavalon Triple Sherry Cask from Taiwan. Now this is our only branded bourbon here. We've had the recipes of bourbon in other whiskeys, but we've never had a bourbon. And so let's talk about bourbon for a minute. Where does the word come from and what makes a bourbon a bourbon? So there are two main rules in bourbon: corn, 51%, and new American oak barrels. If you stick it in the barrel for 2 years or more, you can add the word straight to it. But corn and American oak are the two main reasons. But why is it called bourbon? I mean, now we know what the recipe is, but where does the word bourbon come from? Well, the Bourbons were a royal house in France. They married into the royalty in 1272. And there's a region in France called Bourbon, and it's part of Burgundy. So Bourbon is the royal house of France. Well, why do we call a whiskey a bourbon? Here's two theories. The first one I don't think is correct. There is a province or a county in Kentucky called Bourbon County. And it got its name because Virginia used to own the area that we now call Kentucky. And between 1785 and 1792, they had that region and they called it Bourbon as a thank you to the King of France for helping the Virginians win the American War of Independence against England. So, as a thank you, you name stuff after people that you like. So, thanks, King of France. We're going to name this area Bourbon. Now, Kentucky became a state in 1792, and they kept the name Bourbon County, but it was a much smaller area. And in Bourbon County, the capital of the county in Kentucky is Paris. So some people think if it's a bourbon, it's Kentucky, it's got to come from Bourbon County, and that's where the word comes from. That's probably the least truth. That's the sloppy truth. The more nuanced and interesting truth is this story. There are two brothers, Jean and Louis Tarascon, and Jean is John and Louis is Louis. So John and Louis leave where they lived in France, Cognac, sometime around 1800. And they leave Cognac and they go to the new province of Nouvelle-Orléans, New Orleans, the new city. Now, Nouvelle-Orléans is named for the King of France's brother, the Duc d'Orléans, and he owned Orléans in France, so the Nouvelle-Orléans is New Orleans. And then when they were laying out the town, they thought, well, we should name this street something, and it's a nice street, it's fashionable, it's right, it's a good commerce street, we'll name it Bourbon Street. And so they named it Bourbon Street, which, if you've ever been to Mardi Gras, you are familiar with Bourbon Street. So that's where New Orleans gets into this story. So Jean and Louis arrive in New Orleans sometime around 1800, and they travel up the Mississippi and out onto the Ohio River, and they stop at the little town of Shippingport. And Shippingport is now like a suburb of Louisville. So you've got all these farms around and they're growing corn, and Jean and Louis are from Cognac and they know how to make brandy. So they take the corn, they probably build themselves a cooperage, and they are buying the White Lightning from all the local farmers that are making any kind of distillation. And Jean and Louis are making their own distillation, and they're putting that into the barrels of American oak, and they're shipping it back down to New Orleans. When it gets to New Orleans, they go out onto Bourbon Street and they sell it to the various bars and restaurants and establishments and other traders that are on Bourbon Street, because Bourbon Street is right down in the heart of the city, where the shipping warehouses would have been and that kind of stuff. So people were then trying this new whiskey from Kentucky or Indiana at the time. I don't think Indiana existed yet, but it was this Kentucky whiskey, and they were selling it on Bourbon Street. And so people started saying, hey, I would like that whiskey I had on Bourbon Street. Do you have any of that? Or they would say, get me that bourbon whiskey. And eventually it got just shortened to, hey, I would like that bourbon. So two French brothers are probably responsible, who knows if they even knew it at the time, for naming their style of whiskey. American corn, American oak, sold on Bourbon Street. Two French people and a king at the time who was displaced by his own revolution. That's how we got the name bourbon into American whiskey. All right, let's head outside and taste these two whiskeys.
Come to the table.
Oh, it's a long way down.
It's like trying to sit at a dollhouse table. I guess it's a gnome table.
We have come out to the woods where someone has built a woodland bar. So we are going to take advantage of the woodland bar today, and we are going to taste today's whiskeys.
I thought these were little cups, but I think they're candle holders.
I think
Pretty
they're
cute.
candle holders too.
Yeah.
Okay, so our first whiskey is Green River Bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the two signature concepts about bourbon, Sarah?
Made in the USA? Made with corn. Am I right? Am I right?
Both of those are right.
Oh, thank God.
And also made with new American charred oak barrels. Charred and oak barrel is a kind of a misnomer because it has to be charred to be made into a barrel. So they're always charred. But depending on the level of charring will change the characteristic of the whiskey. Well, this just smells like
Smells like whiskey.
like a Jack Daniels or a Jim Beam or that kind of American whiskey, although
It's got a nice goldy color.
it smells good.
I already read what it's supposed to smell like, but
It smells caramely. It smells sweet.
oh, it does smell sweet.
There are some,
It smells mild, thankfully for me.
maybe a little bit of green apple aromas.
It says the nose should be brown sugar and caramel, underlay of creme brulee and butterscotch. It looks butterscotchy. Palate of caramel, cream candy, and dark brown sugar. Turns to mixed nuts and dark fruit before herbal and floral notes. Very light oak base.
Boy, that's nice. I do get a caramely, sweet, candied nut aroma.
Finish herbal and dark fruits with the layer of thick leather and mellow oak before rye, spice, and pepper. I do feel like it has a drying characteristic.
Kind of a dried fruit.
Yeah. I wonder if it's the rye that makes it feel more like it strips your tongue of... Not my tongue, it's the back of my throat. And I've noticed that with a couple of the other whiskeys as well. I'm not sure what causes that.
It is cold today again. We
It's
are
winter.
approaching the end of fall, the beginning of winter, just in a few days. So this is a good example of American bourbon. Now we're going to try...
Wait. What about the cost?
$30 to $40, widely available.
Well, no wonder
the
people
US.
like bourbon if it's affordable like that and quite inoffensive for drinking.
Right. So now we're going to Taiwan.
Ooh,
This
neato.
is Cavalon. This is triple sherry cask. So that's 3 different types of sherries
Right.
that they're using in their influence, oak influence.
Well, I'm just glad they're reusing the wood like I mentioned before.
Well, it's not only reusing it,
I'm
but
glad it can be versus a one-time use and then...
well, it
you know.
actually is very good for the whiskey
Yeah,
makers.
it's super.
Okay, so here we go. Much more subtle
More subtle. The first one was fairly
in its
light.
aromas.
says the nose should be ripe, mature berries and dried fruits, fresh scents of grapes and citrus, interlaced with chocolate brownie and toffee sweetness. I can't wait to smell it. I think my favorite part about these tastings really is just that I get to sniff things.
That is more complex. It's more like, oh wow,
It almost has that salt aroma that a
Gosh,
couple of them have had.
that
which has
is
been pretty
really
interesting.
amazing. It's totally different. It's nuanced and soft
Here you go.
on the palate. It's smooth as silk.
But spicy. It does say, for the palate, hints of cinnamon, clover, and and spiciness blending into pleasant oakiness and fragrant rosemary. Finish, lingering flavors of sherry dried fruits, warm and smooth with a mellow texture, candied fruit, caramel, and honey sweetness on the finish.
I quite like that one. Both of these are nice,
Yeah.
but this one is just harder to put a finger on as far as the style.
Right, it makes it
It's
feel
more unique.
interesting, and it doesn't strip the back of my throat. So I like that aspect that it didn't do that.
All right, that's all we've got for episode number 10. Oh, cost $75 a bottle for the Kevlon. You can find it for about that much.
Why do I
Sometimes
always like
more,
the more expensive
sometimes
ones?
less. That's makes the Kevlon twice as expensive as the Green River.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all we've got for episode 10. We'll be back for episode 11 in a few days,
Are you sure this isn't 11 already?
I'm sure. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing. If you've enjoyed this episode, give us a thumbs up. And we'll see you in a few days.
Enjoy.
A tutelaire and cheers.
Cheers! Good luck getting up.
Oh, golly. My knees.
Oof, I can't get my leg out.